Welcome back to the Bokeh Podcast, a second live stream in one day. I'm your host, Nathan Holritz. It is a privilege to get to hang with you tonight, and I'm actually kind of excited about doing an evening live stream. I'm hoping that at least some of you will have had the opportunity to step away from your so-called work desk and maybe just join us, listen in, learn a little something from my guest who I'm going to introduce just a little bit, and take advantage of this opportunity to engage in conversation, comment, ask questions, and really make this a group conversation. And there's going to be a lot of valuable practical information we're going to get into, helping you refine your workflows. And we'll touch on that in just a second. As I promised I would do before every episode, I made a small donation to Charity Water, pop the receipt up there on the screen, and just want to put that reminder out there for everybody that there are opportunities all around us that don't even require that much money, that enable us to be able to give back, whether it's a local community or to national or international organizations. There's incredible opportunity there, and I would just encourage you to look for those opportunities. We're lucky to be in the positions that we are, and we should look for those opportunities to give back. All right, I am going to bring our guest in here. I am privileged to not only have a brand new guest with me in Rick Liston, but Rick is chiming in from, well, I guess all the way around the world. Yeah, Rick?
Sunny Australia, mate.
And whereabouts in Australia are you based?
A little wine region called the Yarra Valley. It's about an hour out of Melbourne.
Okay. Now, I've not had the opportunity to go to Melbourne previously. I actually visited a couple of times, went out to Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast, and loved it. I mean, it's such a beautiful, beautiful area. But I'm going to have to get back out there, hit Melbourne, go to Sydney. And wine country sounds lovely too. Do you get to take advantage?
It's funny you mentioned where you came when you came out to Australia. That was actually the image of Australia that my wife had when I met her and when she decided to move here with me.
Okay.
All those sunny, beautiful northern beaches and everything, and then brought her out to Melbourne, where we're significantly colder. Still a long way from the beach, and she's from Ibiza, so she's kind of used to the beach in their life. So it was one of the greatest tricks I've ever pulled.
Yeah, it actually felt, Brisbane, the Sunshine Coast in particular, just felt very much like California, just with a different accent almost. It was, I mean, the scenery was beautiful. But
a lot more swearing.
Probably a lot more swearing. But I'll tell you, the vibe was awesome. I mean, just the community of people there, everybody just seemed so upbeat. And I'll tell you that to this day, and this was like, I don't know, 8-10 years ago that I visited, I still say no worries all the time. And I love it. Like, it's just something like you don't hear people here in the States say it a lot, but it's such an easygoing way of saying, hey, don't worry about it. Just no worries.
You can even make that no wuckers, which is it's kind of starts with the basis of no worries, and then no wucking furries. There's a bit of a reversal there, which I'm sure you can put together, and then brought down to no wuckers.
No wuckers. Okay, I'm gonna have to figure out ways. I'm gonna have to figure out ways to work that in. That's pretty brilliant, actually. Oh man, I love it. All right, well, we've got a lot to cover today, and so I'm just gonna dive right in. We normally talk at the outset of our conversations here at the Bokeh Podcast about brand position, what sets your business apart. And I'm wondering if maybe you can sum up briefly not only your photography business's brand position, but also your education, the educational side of things that you're focused now on with photographers at weddingworkflows.com. Take it away.
Yeah, mate. So on the photography side of things, because I basically only stay in the Yarra Valley, I am really focused on being just the number one resource for weddings in the region. So a local guide, much more than a wedding photographer, pretty much. So I'm definitely kind of getting in front of people when they're making their venue selections, planning their wedding, so that I'm already ahead of them before they're starting to look at photographers. And I guess I like now being in that position where I feel like the couples there are taking a risk if they don't at least consider me having a meeting with me, just because I know so much about getting married in the region, probably more than I think anyone else.
Wow.
Because I'm a part of more wedding days at more places, get to see obviously where they're getting ready, transport, constantly networking with other local vendors. I honestly don't think there's anyone, certainly any other vendor type who is a part of more wedding days as comprehensively as I am. Wow. And then on the wedding workflows front, I just know the massive impact that automation and outsourcing has made for me. So I really feel it's strange that as wedding photographers, we have to kind of reinvent the wheel so many times when all of us are kind of having to build the same things, build the same workflows, build the same backend. We all get into photography knowing that we love taking photos. We love hanging out with people on one of the best days of their lives. But 90% of the time, it's in all of this back end stuff. So just wanted to create a product that allowed everyone else to get that time back, and essentially leveraging automation and outsourcing.
Brilliant. And as you were talking, for anybody who's not watching live, I do have to put this reminder out. Anybody's listening to the audio after the fact, these are live stream. And so you may be missing a few visuals. If you want to go back and replay the live stream, you can go to youtube.com/Bokeh Podcast, facebook.com/Bokeh Podcast. Rick, I had your wedding website pulled up, and I'm going to jump back over to that actually. Raw and unguarded is the big text that you see above the fold there when you land on the homepage. Is that a typical or an atypical rather approach for photographers in that area to be raw and unguarded? Is that kind of what enables you to stand out a bit?
You know what? I was nervous about you looking on that because I listened to some of your pods talking about it, how not to be incredibly vague, and that doesn't necessarily apply to anyone. I thought that bastard's going to pull me right up on that.
Not at all, really. Not a critique. I mean, it could be very much something that's unusual in that area. It sounds like you're in a kind of a unique position and being obviously a massive resource. But what's the photography market like?
So we have a wine region, right? So I'm really lucky to be in a location where there's a ton of kind of wedding venues and yet a pretty small population. So it's a very great destination for people from Melbourne, the big city, to coming out here having weddings. So there's certainly a wide range of people that love those kind of vineyard weddings, but I want to try to distance myself from basically perfectionists or people that are so hell-bent on everything going perfectly, which is why I guess that raw and unguarded is more of, and why I'm using as my header image, something that's would be considered an absolute disaster for a lot of people, which is rain on their wedding day, the groom literally picking up the bride and then running out, but then just that smile on his face as he's doing it, and those kind of moments. So I'm hoping to attract people that can see themselves in that scenario and know that, yes, we're still having a great fun time, and this isn't what I'd planned, but we're all about having a killer party that everyone's going to be talking about for the rest of their lives.
That's brilliant. It actually reminds me, as you're talking about that, I'm seeing the picture. There was one of the things I used to do with my clients, just as kind of a special gift, if you will, an add-on to the experience, was I had a Russian panoramic camera. It shot 35 millimeter film, and I would take that with me on the wedding day. And of course, I wasn't shooting with that most of the time, but I would pull it out and we'd set it up and take just a special shot for them. I'd blow it up, 8x20 fine art paper mounted on foam core, and give that to them just as part of the experience. But one of the images that I had the opportunity to catch was on a rainy wedding day, and the bride had a $10,000 dress on, and the rain's coming down. The groom is helping carry her dress. They've got the umbrella over them, and then the bridal party's following them as they're walking across the street here downtown Chattanooga. And I wish I had it handy to pull up and share with everybody. But
fantastic.
Man, I was so excited about how that turned out. And part of what enabled it, I think, was just that they were game. They weren't letting this kind of thing faze them. But I think a lot of it's on the photographer, too, to kind of set the tone in that regard. Does that come natural for you?
Absolutely, yeah. So I feel like that's probably why, I don't know, that having that ability is probably a bigger part of why I've become a wedding photographer than actually taking photos or being a photographer. So just being cool under fire, being able to have fun in any scenario, make anyone feel comfortable despite what's going on around them, is pretty much my number one trait, I think, ahead of actually being, a talented photographer, which might sound crazy. And I know there's so many amazing kind of artist photographers out there, and I wish I could be that. But then not having that, it's okay, because I can still fall back on my skill to basically make anyone comfortable in any scenario.
But this is actually a perfect segue to my next question, which is about customer experience. And the thing that I keep saying as of late on the podcast is really customer experience holds a much heavier weight when it comes to running an effective photography business or a successful photography business now than ever before, because I've got this, $1,000 phone here that can take beautiful, beautiful pictures. If I even halfway know what I'm doing, it's no longer about being able to take a great picture with a fancy, $5,000 camera. I could do it with my phone now. So if that's the case, then I know the average individual can probably get somewhere close. Then it's not about the photography as much now as offering an experience that just blows people away. And part of that is their ability to be able to, the photographer's ability to be able to interact with the client and handle a variety of situations, keeping them comfortable throughout. And so I think it's important, and I can see that in you. Would you say that's at the root of a great customer experience for you, or is there a different principle that drives that?
Oh, mate, for sure. I mean, yeah, as you've said before in your podcast, man, pretty photos are a dime a dozen. So for me, I think a big part of it is just not vanishing after the booking, right? So I think we put so much effort into attaining that booking, and then there's like a 1.5 year wait, and then there's the wedding day, and so you can show up and be amazing on the wedding day. But I think we actually have so much value to give, because we go around weddings so much. There's so much information we have that we can stay in touch pretty much that whole way, delivering value throughout that whole 1.5 year client journey, to the point that when you show up on the day, they're already raving fans. So before you've taken a single photograph, you've been there helping them, imparting that knowledge, all that awesome experience that you've been getting. So yeah, I think that's certainly a big part of it for me.
Well, I want to transition to the next question, and I'm going to kind of lead the way with this picture that you've got on your weddingworkflows.com website, photo of your wife and daughter. Really, really great photo, by the way. But we talk a lot about time here on the podcast, and this is, I don't know, it almost seems cliche in some ways, but the reality is, I know at least for me anyway, and we were talking about this before we started the live stream today, I started my company largely so that I could have flexibility as an individual. And at the end of the day, it's not about not working or being lazy. It's just having flexibility, and I can make choices about my time, how I spend my time, when I spend my time doing this thing or that. And so I'm curious if there are a principle or two, and I know we're going to get into workflows in general here in just a second, but is there a principle or two, a big idea driving your time management that allows you the freedom, the flexibility to hang out with your family and not just have to be in front of the computer all the time?
Absolutely. And I know we will obviously get to the workflows, but I think, just to start off with, I think building your house on a solid foundation, building your house on rocks. And so for me, that is my lead generation. Where am I getting my leads from? So if you're getting your leads, I guess, from social media, then that's obviously a platform that's always going to require more of you, more engagement, more of your time on the platform, more. And I just never wanted to see myself as a dad sitting there on his phone, telling his daughter I'd be with him in a second. I've just got to engage. I've just got to hang around, for half an hour, replying to these comments. I got to be, at 6:00. So instead, when my wife's coming home from work and my daughter's there, no, that's the important time to be on it. So I just wanted to make sure I wasn't. And actually, you know what? I got lucky not starting out doing this way, because it's just become more like this. But instead, building my leads, so the source of my income, around something that for me was a lot more sustainable. And that was venue referrals. So building a great relationship with local venues, and basically staying local has been really, really key to me, because I know that after putting that time and effort in at the start, those venue referrals will be there throughout my career. So that's just hundreds of leads every year that I don't need to rely on being on my phone to go out and get them, because they'll be coming in.
I love that. And by the way, you're the first person on this show over 500 episodes to answer or to have a response like that in regards to time management. I think that's brilliant. But you're right. It's about being intentional going into it, right? So if you say, hey, I know that a business run on social media, and I know I think there were at least a couple of local photographers here in our market that specifically built their business or have built their business on Instagram. And that's fine, like teach his own. And by the way, at least one of them is single, so there's a bit more flexibility too in their day-to-day schedule, right? But I certainly don't want to have to be stuck to my phone. This thing is awesome for many reasons, but honestly, if I had the choice not to be on social media, number one, I would probably avoid it if it weren't for the sake of these companies that I'm involved in, because I don't want to be stuck to it. I'd like to live. I'd like to engage with people in front of me. That's just more important to me. So I love that you're intentional in building a business model that enables that kind of freedom and flexibility. I think that's a great reminder for everybody listening in. And we'll talk more specifically about the specifics of workflow here in just a bit as well. But very much related to this conversation is delegation. And I know you already mentioned outsourcing as being something, outsourcing your editing as being something that you delegate. But are there other elements of your business that you delegate as well?
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Basically, as much as I can. So anything that doesn't really require my personal attention will be automated, and then anything that can't be automated will be outsourced. So the good thing about, I think, wedding photography is there's so much routine there. So much of what we do is replicable. There's basically procedures that we go through. When a lead comes in, that triggers a process. Mm-hmm. Am I available? Am I not available? If I'm available, which lead response is that going out? If I'm not available, who would I like to refer that wedding to? Okay, once they're available, here's my sequence of email messages going out. I know at this stage in your planning process, you're going to need this information, and this is how to make that information. Like, it's all stuff that somebody else can do for you. And as long as, and this is kind of, I guess, the core philosophy, if you're doing something that somebody else could be doing for you for $10 an hour, then that's all you're working for. So I'd actually much rather spend my time either A, with my family, B, working on another business, or C, shooting weddings. So that's my superpower. That's where I can, be earning $500 an hour. So I'd rather be spending my time doing that. Mm-hmm. And then for everything else that somebody else could be doing for $10 an hour, then I'll allow them to do that for me.
So I'm going to kind of take a step backwards, because I meant to ask this question a little bit earlier, but you're talking about the amount that you're earning. And as you were discussing getting a lot of your referrals from vendors, one of the things that we did as a photography business when I was shooting weddings actively is built a lot of our business honestly came from referrals, and part of those referrals came from a wedding coordinator locally. And the cool thing about that wedding coordinator is she was able to refer appropriate clients to us over the years as our prices even shifted, as they increased. Have you seen that flexibility in working with local vendors as well? Have they been able to send the right clients your way even if your prices shifted?
Well, you know what? For me, the right clients are people getting married at a venue that's 15 minutes from my home. So that's why venue referrals sending me, and we also have similar values in what we appreciate. So I really love the region that we're living in. I'm a big part of the community here. Mm-hmm. I love the landscapes here. I love the vineyard setting. So people that also appreciate those settings will usually then kind of go in and get along. And then there's even like more country venues that I just know if they love that kind of setting, then we should be right to go. And because I'm so comfortable at those venues, it's already my target market, right? So and to some extent, yes. Then there's also, because I'm getting so many leads, I can still be picky in terms of which are my favorite venues. Okay. And how people respond to my forms, what red flags do I see, and then I can all right, I'm going to gel more with these guys. But yeah, I certainly just value those leads coming in that allows me to shoot a high volume of weddings really close to my home.
I love that. And I love the intentionality of trying to find locations not too far away. I was just thinking about sustainability too. That was one of the benefits of working with a coordinator so closely, is it encouraged a sustainable business model, because she was able to refer clients to us despite the fact that our prices were increasing. She could just send the right person our way. Whereas if we put kind of all our eggs in the one basket, which was client referrals, and our prices are increasing, we're pricing ourselves out of that income bracket. And there wasn't the same sustainability there. So it's an interesting model that you're focused on the vendors, and it seems like you'd be in a similar situation there too, where they can send the right clients your way.
Yeah, well, the good thing is there's actually quite a lot of venues, and so there's high-end venues, and then there's a lot more DIY ones. And so I have found that as my prices have increased, I probably tend to get a lot more leads from the higher-end venues than I will from the DIY ones. But that's actually fine. It's been a slow transition, and there's honestly enough venues out here that there's no way that I could ever shoot the amount of leads that I get coming in.
So I want to jump to one last question before we talk about workflows, wedding workflows, and that is to do with an impactful business book, self-help book. This has been a favorite question for years at this point. I'm curious if one or two come to mind that you would want to recommend to our audience.
Yeah, mate. And I don't want to bore your audience going over the same books that obviously you've covered so many times, because so obviously Story Brand. God, I can't remember was the
Donald
Miller's story.
Miller,
I can't remember the actual title.
Building a Story Brand.
Building a Story Brand, right? So you would have seen that immediately, and just showing up as a guide for the region. But I know you've covered that a ton of times, so I thought I would just touch on a book called Never Lose a Customer Again, and that was what actually, like, there was a real aha moment for me when I was listening to them talk about the businesses that make a really big effort in, I guess, getting a sale, bringing a lead in, and then just drop off afterwards. And then the psychological shift that happens after you've dropped, a couple of $1,000s on a photographer, you immediately regret it. That's the thing. Like, unless you're there to allay those fears and bring them back to why they booked you, reassure them that was a great decision, that you're going to be in safe hands with me. So that was a big change, I guess, that I went through when penny kind of dropped, and I'm like, all right, I had been falling off, I had been vanishing, I had been leaving clients in this tumbleweed zone for the whole period of after they've booked to their wedding, or maybe obviously I'd send out a questionnaire beforehand. So now I'm kind of in touch the whole way. So my journey is frankly massive. It's really comprehensive. So I know the kind of decisions that they're going to be making on that planning journey. So I'm touching base with them at those points in time to give them ideas and information on the wedding cake alternatives, bouquets, vow booklets. Like, so I'm kind of always there, always present. So just really not being just a photographer.
Well, I pulled this up. This is Never Lose a Customer Again by Joey Coleman. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it.
All right, perfect. And for some reason, Capital One wants to give me a discount on the book. That's not a bad thing, but we'll get rid of that little pop-up. And we'll make sure to link to this this book in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com for everybody listening and watching. Speaking of everybody listening and watching, I see that we had some comments come in. Kala, actually, who was on the podcast not very long ago, she said, loving the video so far. She corrected herself there. And then she said, what are some lesser known tips, practices to get that quote unquote in with venues? I'm always sure to talk to them before the wedding, as well as tag them in photos, stay in touch. I also curate a gallery that showcases the venue, send them the gallery to use how they like. I find that most venues already have an established preferred photographer, so it's hard to get in. What are your thoughts about that?
Mate, there's so much we can do as photographers to help venues. So the biggest thing is just doing what you can to actually help them as a business and become a really vital part of their business, rather than just another functional photographer. So you can get on the phone and ask them, how's their midweek bookings going? So most venues, if they're doing well, they shouldn't have any issues filling kind of the Fridays and Saturdays, but it's the rest of the week that they can really struggle with. So we kind of have this amazing skill set to, put a web page together, write the copy, take the photos, run ads. So you can basically be the best employee they've ever had without actually being an employee. You can bring in so much business for them midweek, creating stuff for them that they will never forget it. Like, if you're helping them with their business, they will never forget it, and they'll be referring to you as long as they're in business. And that's certainly something that I've been able to do very well. Just remembering that they're a business too, and that I have skills that they need.
That's fascinating. Yeah. That sounds like a podcast episode in and of itself.
Mate, ready when you are.
Seriously, that we might have to come back to it. That's pretty brilliant. Laura Mills says, I love that you're aiming to shoot close to home. That's such a fabulous idea and model. And by the way, I appreciate everybody who's commenting. And by the way, not even just commenting, but joining, just hanging out with us this evening. Don't be shy to comment and to ask questions. Kala said, I can't write, apparently. Thanks for calling out the typo. So, but she also said the midweek targeting is a good point, especially with COVID. Those bookings are a lot more common. Thanks. So, Kala, thanks for chiming in, and I really appreciate the ongoing advice and pointers, Rick. But let's go ahead and jump into the main conversation at hand too. And I'd love to, the title that we gave this episode today was about high workflow for high volume wedding photographers. Just to give a little bit of context to our listeners. Roughly how many weddings do you shoot, at least in a so-called normal year?
100 weddings, so hovering around that.
Wow. Okay. So is this a business model that you always aim to create, this high volume model, or was it something you kind of fell into?
No, so at the start, I was kind of burnt out at 30 weddings a year. And I thought, well, this is the cap. I'm already, just spending so much of my time doing this. I can't possibly take on more. And then that's when I realized, actually, that's insane. There's 365 days in the year, and I'm only doing 30 of them. I have a workflow problem. That's yeah. So then I just set out about making sure I was capitalizing on that superpower, that skill that I have, where I can charge that high dollar amount, and then anything else that somebody else can do for me, have them do that. And then the more I outsourced, the more I delegated, the more I automated, it just meant more time for me to focus on getting the rest of those leads and then being able to shoot the rest of those leads. And so it's, once your weekends are booked, and then, right, you've actually got time to start building, packages, relationships with venues, because you've got your editing, you've got your emails,
Yep.
got your socials sorted by somebody else. And so it just keeps snowballing into a better and better world for you, having more time to spend on, scaling your business, and then actually shooting these high ticket items, spending your time doing the thing that you get paid really well for.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up, because we should add that little, not even a caveat, a really important point. Actually, you're shooting 100 weddings a year, but even your elopement packages start at close to $5,000. So we're not talking about shooting $500 weddings here. We're talking about pretty high-end events, it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, look, I believe I'm pretty good at my job, and because I actually get to shoot a lot more than most photographers, I can kind of accelerate how good I can become. My experience of being a wedding photographer is going kind of at 3 times the pace of anyone else. Plus the exposure that's going out is massive. So when you're shooting more, everyone's seeing more of your images. If people go to a wedding venue's page, they're going to see a ton of my stuff because I'm there so often. So that just generates more desire, more leads, bump up your prices. And so it's not like there's a high volume but low price point. I mean, I'm pretty comfortable. What I'm shooting at now, I remember a couple of years ago just not even conceiving that would be an option that I could shoot for. So I just keep testing myself to see, all right, what can I charge now? Will people still pay for it? But I think there's a limit that I can get to. Like, obviously there are people that charge a lot more than me. But I don't know with where I'm situated that I could keep maintaining the volume of weddings that I'm doing. So I know that I think I'm in a pretty good spot now where, all right, 100 weddings a year at this price point, that's going to keep coming in. And I'm honestly pretty comfortable continuing to do that. So the whole wedding photography side of things is kind of on autopilot now.
Well, but it's important. You talked about your local market, and it is important for photographers to understand how their local market even functions, what the economy is, and what that economy can support as far as price point, what number of weddings might be happening a year at this price point versus this price point versus this one. One of the numbers,
correct,
the data points that's fascinated me over the years here in the U.S. market in particular, is that roughly, and this is the last data that I saw from, it's called weddingreport.com or theweddingreport.com. And they were, I think that the data was between 70 and 80% of weddings photographed in the U.S. were photographed for $2,000 and below. And then, of course, everything else is above that. And it's amazing. I see you raising your eyebrows. And it's kind of a staggering number. But that leads us to multiple conversation points here. One of which, at least from my perspective, is the reality, which is that a large segment of at least the market here, can only support weddings for so much, wedding photography for so much. And, no matter, in fact, when I got married 20 years ago or so, my parents paid for the wedding photographer, and they paid $600 for that wedding photographer. And to them, they didn't make a lot of money, never really have. $600 was a chunk of cash. It wasn't a flippant amount. And that's the reality for a lot of people. So we have this high volume of weddings that are happening in the marketplace that just simply exists. Like, no amount of talking about how important photography is going to change that. So the question is, who is supporting that? And of course, and this really is a segue to my next question, just so you know I'm going somewhere with this, but the apprehension I think a lot of photographers have when it comes to shooting high volume, whether it's the luxury of doing so at the price point that you do, Rick, or potentially tapping into this massive market that photographers usually use as a stepping stone. The biggest apprehension is workflow, right? If I have to shoot 200 weddings a year, for example, in order to make a decent living, I'm not even interested in talking about that because of all these workflow issues, all the logistics involved with that. And that's understandable. I totally get it. But I wonder if there's not an opportunity for at least some photographers who are willing to put some of the systems in place that you're going to talk about now and just to implement a bit of discipline, that there might be opportunity to tap into that market that most photographers, they touch on a little bit, but then they move away from really, really quickly. And there's this massive underserved market here.
Yeah, mate. Actually, you're so right on so many of those points, and it would be remiss of me not to say that I am very blessed to be located in a region where there is, I guess, a potential for people to spend a lot on weddings. But if you're not in that, then, and you're capped by the amount of money that people are willing to spend, then surely just shooting more then is your way to raise that revenue. So, like you said, Nathan, that's going to come down to then, an efficient, tight workflow that's actually going to allow you to take that volume on. Mm-hmm. So for me, there's kind of two parts to it. There's a pre and a post wedding workflow. And the post-wedding workflow, honestly, the first place to start, if you haven't looked at outsourcing or automating, is just going to be getting rid of your edits. So sending that off to somebody else. So Photographer's Edit can take care of, honestly, the biggest chunk of your time. That's like the number one step to start. And then once you've started with that, then you can look at taking the next step so that you can get home from a wedding, leave your cards, uploading into Lightroom, wake up in the morning, select a few previews, and then that's all you need to do, because then you know your VA is going to be taking that catalog, sending it off to Photographer's Edit. They're going to be building a slideshow for you, building a blog page for you. They're going to be extracting answers from your questionnaires from your couple to add to that blog page. So you've got great SEO content with a lot of unique text, linking out to all the vendors, sending that blog post and the download link to the couples, to all the vendors, providing the list of Instagram names to all the vendors so that it's easy for them to share everyone, creating an Instagram highlight story that's kind of going into the day, tagging in all of the vendors in each one of those pages so that they can clearly share that to all of their audience, make an Instagram carousel, pinning, all this stuff that we think we have to do ourselves, but we actually don't. Our job is taking those photos, but the rest of that stuff is so easily replicable by somebody else. And then once you've got this great marketing engine working for you, you can just focus on your time on first getting more leads and then boom, second, shooting them.
All right, cut. That was good. I think we're done with the podcast episode. There's just tons of value just in the last 120 seconds. If we just clip that, I think photographers will walk away with a lot. So I want to dig into that a little bit. And I'm actually not even totally joking. Like within 2 minutes there, you managed to squeeze in so much value about workflow and what photographers could do with their workflow that would add not only value to their business, but to those around them. And I mean, you highlight the importance of that very fact. You've built your business model on adding value to those vendors around you. And that's one of the things that you're free to do because you've got the systems in place. If you didn't, and you're just head down on your computer all the time trying to keep up with the workflow in front of you, you're stuck and you're so limited. And I think that in of itself is a great reminder for our listeners. But I want to backtrack a little bit. And by the way, I appreciate the shout out to Photographer's Edit and the significance of outsourcing. We'll even come back to that in a second. I want to kind of build a base though, because we can throw out different ideas, workflow ideas that will enable photographers to be more efficient. Again, you already did a lot, even just in 2 minutes there. But underlying principles that make a strong workflow, and maybe these aren't even photography centric or photography specific. Are there 2 or 3 ideas even that drive a really strong workflow that photographers need to consider before they start building that workflow?
Yeah, so basically, I did an accounting degree coming out of high school. Not because I ever thought of myself as an accountant, but I really appreciated the principles of risk and return, opportunity cost. And that's something that I kind of ask myself whenever I'm doing a task, what is the opportunity cost here? So if I'm going to spend my week editing this wedding, what else could I have done with that time? What revenue could I have generated with that time? Could I have shot 2 more weddings instead? So it's just anytime you start doing a task, is this something that's replicable? Is this something that I could be either automating or outsourcing? Mm-hmm. If it is, then look at doing that. Now, fortunately, I've been working hard to try to create a process that's easy for a lot of people, because I know there's a big barrier to entry. It's a big barrier to starting off, finding a VA, for instance, that's going to be able to do kind of what you want to do without taking the time to train them. With editing, if you haven't done that before, it's scary. So trying to reduce those barriers. That's why companies like yours have just been, I think, a phenomenal game changer for so many people, so many families, to be honest. Because you're giving so much time back. So once you're able to start asking yourself, right, can somebody else do this for me? And what am I really gaining or losing by still doing it myself? So that answers your question, but it's the underlying, I think, principle for me in so much of this stuff is just what's the opportunity cost?
And that's, I wish I had the right words actually to describe this. It's not about being cliche, because I don't even think it's talked about enough in our industry, but the significance of opportunity cost. A lot of times photographers, when it comes to delegation, especially with editing, because that's the most commonly delegated probably workflow item in a photographer's workflow, at least in this day and age in our industry, at least the US market. But the argument a lot of times is it's going to cost, I'm going to have to spend cash to outsource that thing. I can hold on to that cash. And there's, by the way, I empathize it, understandable fear giving up that extra cash, when especially for photographers who are just getting started, they're like, I just want all the money in the bank account that I can possibly have. But what is missed in that argument is what lies on the other side of that slight expense, which is the opportunity, as you pointed out, to do those things that are going to actually grow your business. And that doesn't even address the whole topic of time with family, as we talked about before. But just the opportunity to be able to do more that will generate revenue for our business that can't be automated, that necessitates your involvement in the conversation and the engagement with those vendors in particular. That really gets missed. So I'm glad that you highlight that. And for those of you listening and watching this evening and listening after the fact as well, don't miss out on the significance of that. It's easy to glaze over it because you might hear it in a workshop or a conference somewhere. But what could you be doing if you were able to delegate not just editing, but email management and album design and accounting and all these other things? What could you do with that time that would generate additional or even more revenue? That's really important to keep in mind. But you mentioned, and by the way, I've literally got right here in front of me, like Rick, a notebook with a pen. I'm kind of doing old school, taking notes here, and I already wrote down pre and post from your earlier comments. And I just want to kind of get into, first of all, the pre-wedding workflow briefly, maybe a couple of workflow steps that you think are important for photographers to implement that maybe they don't regularly, at least based on conversations that you have with them. What would those be?
Yep, so pre-wedding workflow steps. So, excuse me. Basically, every time you're at a wedding and you see a scenario that could have been prevented if they had been told about it beforehand. So you might see them standing up, reading their vows off an A4 piece of paper or off their phone. And you think, you know what, that would actually look a lot better with a vow booklet. So I'm just going to research where to get a good vow booklet on Etsy. I'm going to add that email into my workflow. Maybe you've seen a beautiful silk ribbon flowing off a bouquet and you're like, that looks absolutely gorgeous, man. The photos of this bouquet look insane. So I'm going to send that off as an example at the time when I know people are looking for their flowers. Maybe you've seen some killer wedding cake ideas, and you know that when people are thinking about what wedding cake they're going to be choosing for their wedding, and they might not be a wedding cake person, they might be looking at alternatives. Boom, here's an email with a gallery showing you all these different ways. And the family photo list, that's to me is one of the biggest potentials of disasters on a wedding day. So I've just got a really extensive email going out detailing everything they can be doing to avert that disaster, how to plan for it, how to make sure it goes smoothly so that they get more time for them, and just making sure they realize what the cost to them is if they don't get it done right. Harvesting, I guess, information from the couples before the wedding that you're going to be able to use afterwards in a blog, so you don't have to write that stuff yourself, in your Instagram caption, so you don't have to write that stuff yourself. Like, this is great, unique content that's really relevant to the couple, that's emotive, but reduces one of your, and I know certainly one of my biggest headaches, and that's emotive writing about a wedding, which when you're doing a high volume of them can be tough. So I want to be making sure I'm getting actually the resources from couples beforehand to be able to use when talking about their weddings. Collecting like vendor data to make sure that you are sharing all the photos in the best way possible. So collecting that in a great practical way So even just instructing the couples on how to give you that vendor data so that you can just copy and paste it rather than spending time typing all that stuff out, finding their website, finding their email addresses. The questionnaires, just to start you off the relationship, a little speed date questionnaire that's pre-filled with answers from you, so that they get it's a bit more two-way, so they're getting some information back from you in terms of what your perfect weekend away is, or what your favorite album that you'd be bringing to a deserted island would be. So I think it's a lot easier then for them to say, all right, he's clearly taken the time to put that together, and I can gel with him, and we can very easily then resonate from that. And then good thing about actually doing that at the start of that wedding planning process is because they've usually forgotten about it by the time the wedding comes around, but then you can read it in the car before heading up that wedding, and you've got so many points of commonality to kind of talk about during your photo session. You can be bringing along a speaker, playing their favorite music, and then just like, what? How did you know, man? There's a ton of stuff that you could be doing that makes you walk into that wedding already a superstar in their eyes. So,
and I'm jotting notes down again as you were talking, but expectations management, resources, and or helpful information. It's a lot of this process, I would assume, just based on your comments about automation, you're automating the sharing of that information with these clients? Okay.
That's right. So like I said, you just, once you see an opportunity that is going to be helpful for every other client, that's just a step you can put in your workflow, which obviously goes out automatically to everyone else.
Is there, and I know this is a much more loaded conversation, and our listeners can get more information through your site. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but is there a particular piece of software that you're using to kind of manage the automation of that communication?
So you're right. I neglected to mention, but a CRM is essential in this. I don't know how I'd be doing it without one, to be honest. And there's so many great ones out there that I'm sure you're going to find absolutely perfect for you.
Do you have any particular recommendations? Are we avoiding naming any one?
I just don't want to isolate. I honestly, I personally use Studio Ninja, but I have an account with Dubsado as well, and I'll be getting one with Tave just to be able to make the same workflow, trying to get the best out of those platforms. Mm-hmm. But the point is just using one, just getting one. So they're all able to do workflows, and they're all able to obviously send out those automated emails, and that's the biggest part of it.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Yeah. And we've mentioned those platforms. I think Studio Ninja is one of the ones that hasn't come up as much in the past. We'll make sure to link to that and all of these resources that we're discussing in the show notes for everybody listening and watching at bokehpodcast.com. But let's go ahead and jump to the post-wedding workflow, which I think for a lot of photographers might be even a bigger headache, and where we could spend a little bit more time. We already discussed the significance of post-production. When it comes to post, do you do your own culling before you send the color work off, or do you send all of it out?
So I'll select, so the morning after a wedding, I will select around 100 images of my favorite photos from the day. And the reason I do this is because that's a really great indication to the editors of how I want the editing done. I also feel like those 100 images, like I kind of get almost 80 to 90% of the vibe of a wedding from that. So I'm actually happy to put my time into just nailing the best 100 photos. Mm-hmm. And because I'm doing that the morning after, it means that my VA is actually able to create that blog page, create that slideshow, send that out to the couple. And you've got all these people that were just seeing you in action at a wedding day, now getting shared a link to a great, pretty comprehensive gallery and slideshow the day after. So they're actually much more likely to look at that and spend time. It's the day beforehand. Like, how you feel a day after the wedding versus 4 weeks away. Even as vendors as well, you're going to be looking at that. So there's a couple of benefits there. They're spending a lot of time on your site, which is great for SEO. They're also much more likely to then go and check out your other galleries, contact you if they're looking at getting a photographer themselves.
Sure.
And so I like that fast turnaround. So one of the common things that couples will absolutely love about the service is just how fast they got to see a slideshow the next day.
Yeah, we even did, I don't know if you've ever done this before, we used to do slideshows even at the wedding. We would take some of the images and process them very quickly and put together a slideshow there at the wedding, and it blew people away. It was the coolest thing to see them gather
absolutely.
around.
Yeah.
It was so fun. So
that's awesome.
So then when it comes to, I'm curious to get your take on this. I mean, I know you're a systems-oriented guy, but when it comes to delegating something out, especially like editing, I know one of the biggest hangups besides cost is the idea that somebody else is processing your images and maybe they're not going to match your editing style. A lot of that just requires good communication. In fact, any good delegation requires good communication. And I'm wondering if you can make a few pointers or suggestions about strong communication in the process of giving something to somebody else to get done in a way that might be similar to you.
Yeah, so I think there's two answers to this question. And one is, while you might be right that nobody else could do it exactly how you would do it, you've got to really ask yourself, once again, what's the opportunity cost here? So I could spend my time editing this thing, getting this exactly as I want it, but that's actually costing me the potential to go out and shoot a bunch more money, triple my revenue, spend all that other time. So your decision to put a priority on getting your edits perfect, you're saying that's more important than time with my family, scaling my business, earning more money. Then the second aspect is how to communicate more clearly. So there is a really simple tool called Loom. It's a freaking great little extension. And basically you get a gallery back from your editor and you see something. You can actually just start a Loom video, go through reviewing it, let your editor know, actually in this scenario, I see you've done this, I've seen you've cropped it this way, I probably would have cropped it this way, I've got a preference for that. Hit pause, keep going through until you see another scenario. Hit unpause. I see the sky could have been brushed out a little bit different here, drop the highlights there. So just it's a video link that you can send to them, just screenshotting your review of their process so they can see exactly what you mean very quickly, and so you'll get on the same page really fast. And the other thing is, like, they're bloody good at this. I don't know about you, but I got into wedding photography because I like taking photos, man. I'm not an editor. So just leveraging their abilities to edit, I think is the way to go.
Yeah, and I have to touch on this, and I think you actually commented on the post that I put on my stories the other day, but a lot of photographers will argue, oh, I like editing, so I'm going to do the editing. And I even hear people speaking or teaching at workshops or conferences saying, hey, if you like editing, more power to you, go do that thing. But the opportunity cost is what's not being considered in that. And I could argue that I like watching Netflix, but it doesn't mean I should sit around watching Netflix all day. It doesn't enable me to run my business effectively or reach my goals. So it seems like that's kind of a broken thought process. I don't think there's anything wrong with liking editing. I like to edit. I like to play in Lightroom. I think what you shared earlier is a beautiful kind of compromise, not even a compromise, but I guess, what's the best word here? Like a hybrid situation where you get to process a few images yourself. You're staying in touch with that. It even acts as a point of reference for the editing team. And then you give the bulk of that work, which really could be categorized as busy work, to somebody who can handle that for you, can still do a great job of matching what it is that you do. But the other thing I have to highlight too, Rick, and reiterate this, because in 13 years of business at Photographers Edit, one of the biggest, limitations for photographers when they begin to outsource is that they kind of just, in many cases, even just kind of dump the images on us, expect something to get done without really communicating that, and then they don't get a great finished product back, and then they leave. There's a lack of understanding when it comes to the importance not only of communication of their preferences up front, but then what you highlighted, which is the feedback process after the fact. And it's so important, not just to get positive feedback, but if you get a set of images back that need to be tweaked or adjusted here and there, to give that feedback. We've built a system into Photographers Edit that enables that and makes it easy for the client to do that and give specific references and examples. And it's still, photographers push back. They're like, it takes too much time. And literally, if they just did it, it would take maybe 5 minutes to take a couple screenshots and click on a couple drop downs. And it's free to have the order redone, and boom. Not only did we get better for it because they give us feedback, so the working relationship becomes better, but then they didn't have to go spend however long going back and fixing the problem. And it's a commitment to that long-term relationship and developing the working relationship it's so vital. So I'm glad that you highlight that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's actually a big part with when you're dealing with virtual assistants as well. So if you're going in with the expectation that they should be in your brain and knowing exactly how you want to do everything, you're going to be disappointed. But if you go in knowing that, okay, this is actually a separate human being who is not in my brain, and I'm going to do everything I can to show them visually why it is that I like the things the way they are, spend that time up front, make that investment, then it's really going to pay dividends long term.
Okay, so we have editing, post-production. We also have album design is another significant component of a lot of photographers' workflow after the fact, whether they're shooting a portrait session or they're photographing a wedding or event of some kind. Do you have a process in place for that? Do you delegate that process as well?
Absolutely, yeah. So every wedding will get an album design, basically but not by me. So this is just my sales automation is obviously another workflow, and I think there's so much stuff in there as well that so many people don't touch on, but it's one of those incredible things. Like, that's probably the most money that most photographers are leaving on the table that kind of can be solved by a great workflow. So, are you setting up a gift registry so that all the guests of the wedding who are looking for something to spend their money on as a present to the couple, are they able to purchase a photography digital gift card for the couple? Like, that's just money for jam that you could be making before the wedding. Obviously the series of early bird offers, anniversary gifts, 20% off if you approve this album design. All this stuff can go out automatically and really just help drive that revenue. And thank you cards, like, I don't know what it's like in the US, but here every wedding will send out thank you cards to all of their guests. So it's a service that we can do. So I'm just going to proactively send you a design so that you can just click yes, and we'll order that for you. There's a ton of stuff there on the table in terms of workflow automation.
I'm kind of smiling because your nonchalance and just kind of throwing, for example, thank you card design out there like it's a normal thing is hilarious. Only because I know it's not the norm for photographers, at least here in the US, to do something like that. But again, you have the freedom to think about these types of things because you've got good systems in place everywhere else. So 2 or maybe 3 questions, if you don't mind, just as we finish up here. When it comes to the album design process, you mentioned that somebody else does that. Are you working with a VA for that? Are you working with a company that handles that process for you?
I work with the VA for that because I actually found there's a pretty simple formula that I use for my own album design. So I just went through the same process that we were discussing before of what you would go through with your editor. So here's me doing it. These are the reasons I'm making these decisions. This is why I want a scene like this. I want it separated from there. I want to be spending 2 to 3 spreads dedicated to this part of the day. I want my reception photos, in a group of shots. Like there's actually a formula that can be followed to it and applied to other weddings. And then like a big part of the headache with album design is then dealing with the revisions afterwards. But that's just that's something that somebody else can do because it's pretty straightforward feedback. Like, can you please replace this photo with this photo? Can you bring in this one? Can you make that one larger? If you're doing those things for, and you could be paying somebody else $10 an hour, then that's all you're working for.
Yeah. And that really is such a tedious process, the back and forth of it. At print sales, when I was a photographer, we worked with a company for quite a while. It was an online gallery, and then ultimately they handled print sales for us, ran sales like you were talking about during the holidays. Basically was our front end, and we didn't really have to touch it. And that was intentional on our part. We wanted that workflow. We'd charge a premium up front, and we'd let the print sales be handled by this company. They're no longer in existence. But are you working with a lab or an online gallery that kind of enables some automation like that?
Yes, so PicTime is who I'm working with, and they're obviously renowned. No photographer I think out there would not have heard that how good their sales automation is. So it's really getting in there and making the most of that. I don't know, it's a bit of a beast coming up with a system. So that's a product that I'm working on now that I want to be able to release. That's what I was touching on in a PicTime webinar 2 nights ago. But basically it's just the workflow that I've come up with, and it's kind of a little dance between about 6 different automations. Ones that I've had to hack together myself. So the gift registry, the rolling publish so that the couples can see the gallery before it's live to the rest of their guests so that they can hide any photos that they don't want, the thank you card design going out, an early bird promotion that's 20% off for 14 days, abandoned cart, an anniversary gift, a gallery expiration, basically so after 2 years of the gallery being online, you can offer them a service of continuing to hold those photos for them at a subscription fee, and then also combine that with another 20% off gallery expiration discount, and then sending an album offer based off a design where a 20% discount if they approve it within the month.
I'm amazed, and first of all, I'm a huge fan of PickTime. One of the main reasons is that they have to have the best design in the industry. Their site, I'm obsessed with minimalist design, and their site is just gorgeous. I don't know who might be doing the actual design work for that stuff, but it's just absolutely stunning. So just the user experience is enjoyable for that reason. But I'm amazed that there aren't more companies that have taken on that model. We worked, the company was called Pictage that we worked with years ago. And they were really at the time, I think, the only company that had this type of model. And I realized the advantages to IPS and the money that you can make there. We just didn't want to take on that model. So to have a company that you can just give the images to, and literally everything like you're talking about, from even basic editing, but then album design work and print sales and running sales during holidays and so forth, just automating, and the communication, the email, everything. It was incredible. You literally had a business partner in that company. So the fact that PickTime is doing that, I think, is brilliant. I'm a huge fan of them. They're owners I've had the opportunity to spend a little bit of time with. And I think we actually had them on the podcast 2 or 3 years ago as well. But cool people, incredible business model, and we'll make sure to link to them in the show notes too at bokehpodcast.com for everybody listening in. Make sure you check out PickTime, huge resource. Rick, I know we've taken quite a bit of your time today, and I appreciate you sharing so much information here, but it's also just like scratching the surface. So I do want to give a shout out to weddingworkflows.com. I'm going to pull this up really quick and just share with our listeners, if you will, what they can get going to your website, some of the resources you have available, if you will.
So it's early days, but as of right now, basically, you can have my pre-wedding workflow. So if you are on Studio Ninja, we can install that into your system. But I do have an option there to just download all the templates. So all my email templates, my questionnaire templates. So then you can plug that into your system. If you subscribe to my newsletter, I'll certainly be announcing when the workflow is ready for Dubsado, when it's ready for Tave. And then the other aspect is the virtual assistant agency. So these are virtual assistants that are trained in serving wedding photographers. So many of the things that we do, that obviously handling your edits, social media, slideshows, posting, Pinterest, sending to vendors, magazine subscriptions. I even got mine doing like my Xero bank reconciliations, just like all these common tasks that we end up doing. It takes actually quite a while to create standard operating procedures, SOPs. So what I offer here with my virtual assistant agency is just removing that barrier to entry of all of that time spent creating your own SOPs and training them on things that I think are pretty replicable amongst wedding photographers.
Well, I think not only having the resource of the workflows outlined the way that you do. In fact, I want to jump right over real quick back to your website. And for anybody listening in who missed it, it's weddingworkflows.com. Of course, we'll link to this and social media, Wedding Workflows, in the show notes. But with this workflow, 4 automated workflows, 23 email templates, 3 questionnaires, 1 instructional walkthrough video. And by the way, I just have to say, Rick didn't ask me to go through this in detail and sell it for him. I just think that, you can see based on his experience and the business that he's created here that he has a lot to offer to this conversation, and to be able to tap into that a little bit with this workflow, I think is a really valuable resource. So we'll put all the information, Rick, in the show notes for our listeners at bokehpodcast.com. I really appreciate you making time to just, again, hang out with us, share some of your advice, your perspective. This has been really, really helpful.
Dude, thank you very much. Always love sitting with a more handsome version of myself, which, I mean, look at this right here. Look at
we
this.
Did the black t-shirt. Yeah, what's up?
The slightly unkempt beard, and I don't know, we've been in lockdown for 2 months, so hence my offensive haircut. But I think if I could get around with a snappy haircut like that, then yeah, you're reminding me of a version of myself that I could look like.
Well, man, seriously, I appreciate you making time for all of our listeners. this podcast at the end of the day is about adding value and practical, actionable content. And you've done that for us today. Again, even just in that 2-minute clip, we're going to have to literally pull that and push it out on social media because it's going to give food for thought for a lot of photographers. But again, thanks for adding value to the conversation. And thanks everybody for joining us, for hanging out, for listening in, for commenting. And make sure if you want to go back and check out the replay, youtube.com or facebook.com/Bokeh Podcast. Thanks a lot.
Nathan, cheers, mate.